Regulation is going to force advisors to change whether they like it or not. I don't think the UK population is ready for a machine to tell them what to do with their money.
Shauna Mullin is the head of product at M&G PLC.
I think advisors get a bad rep in our industry. Everyone says they don't like change, they don't want technology. But if you built something that was intuitive and easy to use, they'd bite your hand off for it. Digital engagement scores are still something that we track and that we are measured upon. It's not something we want people interacting with that often. So I think, what does a successful relationship look like with a customer?
Thanks again for listening. I really loved this conversation. Hope you did too. If so, give us a like, give us a share on social media. Thanks again. Welcome to Advice Amplified.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So we initially got chatting in relation to technology and how it's applied to financial advice and all the different tech options and how awesome financial advice could be, but how it's limited by a few things. I wonder what your thoughts were on how tech could be the driver or be leveraged to make great client-advisor relationships.
I think it's a really topical question at the moment. I think if you reflect on where we are in the industry and kind of the experiences that most big organizations have, it's usually friction for an advisor and for a customer, and that's what we've done. And I don't think it's been on purpose. I think it's more been a case of some technologies come out or new things come out that we've tried to bolt to a legacy experience or to a legacy technology, which has just caused issues. And I think over time, we've kept on adding to the house, and we've said, oh, we'd like a garage, and then we'd like a conservatory and change the bathroom, but we're not going to rip it out. And I think we've ended up in like a difficult place where we've tried to build on legacy technology. And that will continue to be a challenge as we start to move towards the new technology and the pace of change that's coming in the industry now in terms of what's available. But I do think it's a time where we can kind of step back, especially with all the regulation and kind of, the focus from the FCA on customer outcomes and making advice more accessible. I think it's a really exciting time to be solving this problem.
How do you pick a route in? Because there's solving the problem with legacy and mess. Then there's the opportunity of doing new cool stuff. What's your approach to starting, I guess?
That is a really interesting question, because I think in my current role, I've got one foot in the what can we do, blue sky, and one in the, well, this is our reality today. How do you bridge the two? And I think if you get too far down one without reflecting on the other, I think that's what sometimes gets you into trouble. Or kind of doesn't get you somewhere you need to get to quickly. I think ultimately understanding the problem is my first piece, and then almost trying to be able to tell a story about how you want to solve the problem. I then think having a really good team around you who know the architecture, who know kind of the nuts and bolts of what it is you're trying to move around to create an experience is critical. And I think, I really rely heavily on those people to pull me back quite a lot. But essentially, I think my role is about how do I tell a story? How do I say how we'd love to solve a problem? And then it's about getting the right people around that problem to say, well, that's feasible, that's not, or we could do that first, we could do that second. And that's when it starts to really become something tangible where you can say, actually, we're actually going to do that. As opposed to, oh no, that was a nice, bright idea.
Yeah. So I suppose actually spending some time to understand the realities of where you are now, cut through the noise, cut through some of the, I suppose, opinions and hot attitudes, and actually where are we?
And it's a couple of levels as well. It's almost what do the advisors think? How are the advisors doing? What do our colleagues think, and how are they finding it? And then what is the technology actually telling you, and what are its limitations? And I think it's very easy to be led by one of those, and then ignoring the others. So I think that's kind of the process we go through.
This is a risk of me. This is my opinion, but it seems like financial planning is a weird industry in some ways when you consider tech. So most industries come at the client experience, and if you're trying to deliver a proposition or run a business, you kind of say, well, this is what I want to be able to do. How do I achieve that? Whereas quite often it seems that financial advisors look at what's out there and cobble it together as best they can, and that's their experience. And it feels like a strange inversion of that, consumer journey.
It has. And I think part of that is the regulatory environment that we're in. I think that layers on a certain amount of pressure to designing journeys. Also, the risk appetite of the organization who's designing that. I think, you can end up with some places that are completely risk driven. So you're intently trying to protect yourself while trying to deliver a seamless experience. And those things don't come naturally together, and you've got to think quite carefully about it. I think also, I'd say with any business, it's about getting something out there quickly. So, there's pressure for you to get it out there. So those three things: what's the best outcome? What's the best experience? But then how do we keep it safe and how do we do it quickly can sometimes end up in some of the mess that we kind of create with those friction or the issues within the journey.
Yeah, so you touched on there slightly the kind of realities of legacy tech and regulation. I wonder what your take is, like looking back at the industry. Do you think tech's actually like helping advisors do their job and have good interactions with clients, or is it more of a hindrance? And what's your like observations on that kind of seesaw balancing act?
I think it's actually a question that kind of came up at work this week in terms of, actually, we've got all the technology. Why do we need to do anything else? And I'm like, but the way we've put it together is we've not made it easy for the advisor. We've not made it intuitive for the advisor. So we said, oh, there's a great bit of tech. We need that. And we do everything we can to kind of like give it to the advisors. But is it single sign-on? Does the advisor have to rekey things? And because all of that stuff, I'd say looking backwards, has always cost a lot and has added time and complexity to the architecture. It's always been the piece that we're like, oh, well, we'll just copy and paste, or we'll get an admin to do it. And I think that's the piece where we've not made it easy for advisors to adopt technology. I think advisors get a bad rep in our industry. Everyone says they don't like change. They don't want technology. But if you built something that was intuitive and easy to use, they'd bite your hand off for it. And I think that's where we've kind of got a little bit out of step with the advisors, because of course they want things to be easier. Of course they want to have powerful conversations with customers. I just think at the moment, because of how we've had to build things, it's just not delivered what we expected.
I guess it's really tough, isn't it? Like you say, with regulation, with the realities of risk aversion in an industry that should be risk averse. You can't just do the Silicon Valley style, chuck something out, make it a Wizard of Oz style experiment and kind of iterate from there. Have you found any kind of ways of balancing like your kind of digital product management, running agile sprints and experimenting and iterating versus, hey, we've got to be careful here?
I think that is one of the biggest challenges in my role, not being able to do that. And I think you sometimes get caught up in the noise where you kind of say, well, we've got this big thing to deliver and there's this big commitment that everyone kind of like focuses on, and you lose the ability to do that quick prototype, quick proof of value, fail fast, learn fast, move on. But I think that also the industry at the moment, in terms of the technology that's coming out, is bringing that back to the fore, because there are lots of people out there now who are bringing new technology out really quickly and then, iterating on it. And you're starting to see massive development within their product in a very short period of time. So I think there's more of a focus on it, and it's something that should be part of what we do. But as you say, it's the risk appetite and the big cogs in an organization make it very difficult sometimes to do that.
And how does that kind of feel? That's a really random way of phrasing it. But I often, it's almost like an anxiety gets, because you see everything moving really quickly and you're like, wow, this is really hard to keep on top of. And I know when people talk about AI, it's borderline impossible to keep on top of the latest innovations and what's new. How's that been?
Yeah, I think we were never going to be one of the first that did something, right? And I think that is just a reality for some enterprise clients or enterprise customers. They're just not ready to jump in to be the guinea pigs, as much as everyone behind the scenes would love the opportunity. So I think there's a piece around, but this is why this piece with technology is so important, because if you jumped, and because of how quickly it's going, you've actually got to be quite considered about what is the product, who's building it, what have they got planned next? Because actually you want someone who has similar aspirations, a similar view of the problems you're trying to solve and how you're trying to solve them, so that almost your roadmaps match in terms of which products are they looking to solve next. That's almost as important as the product they've just delivered and the one that you're looking for. And I think that's where potentially there's a lot of technology out there at the moment, maybe that kind of came out a couple of years ago, that hasn't got that mentality of we've got to keep improving, because they were like, what we did then was revolutionary in the industry. And then they've not moved forward again, but they've all been overtaken. So I think there's that piece that, that's probably the piece that I would be saying to my team, that's what you've got to be thinking about. It's almost like, right, what's through the first door? what else are they doing? How is a partnership with that company going to help us solve other problems on our roadmap in terms of where we want to be in 2 years, in 3 years, and in 4 years? Because I think that's the make or break of if you're choosing less technology that does more, you need it to be there for longer, and you need to be part of like your core strategy going forward.
So I was going to ask about like how crowded the market feels right now. I suppose it follows on from that rapid pace of change, but there's almost, I can see like a decision fatigue on, do we buy this thing? Do we buy that thing? Do we buy it all? Do we just buy one? And how do you kind of navigate that?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I think there was a slide that kind of came out of kind of all the players in every stage of the advice process. And I mean, there was probably 8 providers in every vertical. I think the piece that's making it so much more difficult is now that providers are straddling capabilities, but they're not straddling the same capabilities. So you try to want to find something and they're like, oh, well, they play over there and over there. But these guys that I'm looking at them to compare them don't play in those 2 verticals. They play over there. So it's making it very difficult to do a selection of which one's best, because they're starting to play different places. And I guess the next bit on top of that is everyone wants the fact find, right? So how many providers can you have who want the fact find? And then it's like, well, where does that data sit? And I think that's also causing complexity, because I think there's a big shift around understanding the power of having the data and what value that it can drive for both the organization, but then also the technology provider. And I think that's the piece that is going to cause fatigue. And almost there'll be some people that says, I'm just not going to make the decision. Someone will do it for me and I can buy a packaged product end to end, as opposed to being the architect of that product themselves.
I mean, that's one of the problems I see with some of these market maps. It's almost whoever it is that's putting those together is defining the categories and defining the experience and saying, these are the things you should have and here's your options in those, which feels kind of odd for someone ethereal to be describing that.
Yeah, and I think like also if you look at those maps, like over time, they've always been very advice focused. It's like this advice tech and that advice tech, and they've kind of ballooned a little bit and gone a bit further out, and they're kind of merging with other people or buying capabilities and consolidating. But when you play it back to, well, what are we here to do? We're here to help people. So we need an underlying capability to manage relationships and to help people understand and manage and achieve their goals. The financial strategies piece is almost just like a little bit that wedges into that customer relationship. And I think that's where we kind of somehow along the journey have lost a little bit of our way in terms of, is this about customers or is this about an advice process? And is this about selecting a product? Which I think we have kind of veered towards a little bit.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, you see plenty of really successful financial advice firms that have great relationships with their clients running their business on Excel. You think, if it's possible there, why is all this stuff so hard?
Exactly. And I think, oversimplifying it. And I think there's a difference between what a small IFA needs versus a big network, in there. And then also, how do you get a USP between being your own firm versus a network, which I think adds some opportunity essentially to build a bit of a product, to build an experience that you may not necessarily need. But makes it easier to provide advice, makes it quicker to provide advice. Because at the end of the day, people are time poor, and we need to be able to support more people in less time, which is quite critical.
I suppose, like stepping back from the technology, do you have? Well, I know you will, and I'm keen to hear them. Like your thoughts on what the North Star is for like the next kind of 5 years. What a great kind of proposition would look like for an advisor and a client, and what the core components of that perhaps would be.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, I think it's interesting that you said 5 years. I think for me, there's a lot of people saying, well, AI is going to take over. And I don't think the UK population is ready for a machine to tell them what to do with their money. I think the advisor is extremely important to building that relationship. But I believe we can supercharge every interaction with data, with insight, with recommendations that essentially we can put in the hands of the advisor to be able to deliver value to the client or the customer from the very first interaction. That's not really something that happens today. We have a fact find meeting. it lasts for a long time. The advisor is trying to build a relationship, trying to build trust, trying to understand, but they're also frantically writing things down in the background, don't want to miss anything. And then they kind of go away and squirrel away and then come back with a plan. I think in the very near term, we should be in a situation where that advisor doesn't need to scribble anything. I mean, there's technology out there today already doing it, listening to the conversation, providing insights, and populating all of those facts into the CRM. And I think generating a financial plan. So not a financial strategy or an SR, but a plan that the customer can say, this is my plan to reach my goals over a long period. And then the SR and the advice interactions become kind of points along a timeline whereby we've said, we think you should do this. This is why you should do it. And they almost become an addendum to that plan, as opposed to the SR being the thing that you go for advice for.
Yeah, because ultimately, no one really cares. We know, I don't think people read them. I don't think they're read. I don't think anyone buys into them.
Well, I think they don't, because at the end of the day, they have come and they are paying you for your advice. So I don't think there's many people, like, we don't read our Apple's T's and C's.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
I don't think there's many people that will do it then and there. I think it's something to provide reassurance. You've got that guarantee. But I think if we were to be able to plot that on a timeline along, a relationship timeline, I think it starts to change the dynamic and it starts to show a different value for that relationship and that service.
Yeah, so it's almost like a point in time snapshot of, this is where you are, this is what we said we should do.
Yeah.
We'll come back and review that.
Yeah. And then I think the piece in terms of how do we change it for the customer, we don't make it, I'll see you in 365 days. This is, we're here. If there's a change, if you think you're off track, you let me know. If I think you're off track, I'll let you know. But to date, that highly bespoke customized service has been almost unachievable for advisors with client banks of 200 because they haven't been able to do all of that themselves manually. Technology has made that feasible and possible. So we can now start to deliver a service like that without it breaking the bank.
Geez, so you mentioned an advisor looking after, say, 100, 200 clients. Is there a world in which that becomes a metric that we try and kind of push up?
Well, I think, it then becomes limited to how much face time an advisor has. I think at the moment, an advisor can work into the night if they need to, but that's not really something that will be feasible if basically we're saying, we're going to do all of your admin for you, where you don't have to push any paper in the background and you don't have to do any heavy lifting. All you've got to do is build great relationships and help people understand their aspirations and then kind of be able to tell the story of how they're going to get there with your support. So the limitation on kind of like what those clients' bank sizes can be are based on how much time someone wants with you. So if we stick in the 2 hours at a time, that's going to be limited versus a world where you can actually start to get to 4 or 5, 20, 25-minute conversations in a year. That also can change the composition of a client bank because you do have more of those times as opposed to those big blocks of time going forward.
I suppose that's the fun thing with advisors and clients, that's kind of what they both value. That's what they want to be doing, not the other stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I think that sometimes does get lost where an advisor believes it's their job to capture facts and their job to write reports. I think, that is probably something they won't need to do for very much longer. But I think the value in being able to build a relationship, to be able to understand someone and their aspirations is the critical piece an advisor kind of plays in the puzzle.
I think it was so interesting that you said about the fact find, the advisor taking notes, and that kind of experience being fundamentally shifted. Because I suppose I've been around in this kind of tech world for long enough to see people put the fact find on the internet and then force the client to fill that out. And there's something that always sticks with me with an advisor saying, actually, the client telling me where they live and their address is a really powerful point of conversation and relationship building. That I can understand if they live in a flat or is it a house, is it a bungalow, do they want to move, and all those kind of things. So is that kind of how you think some of those problems could be solved, rather than just pushing the fact find onto the client? We actually find a cooler way of doing it.
Well, as you say, like the digital fact find has been out for a while, and we've got a lot of providers that provide a digital onboarding capability, and we'll send you a link and you can kind of do it. And some people do it and some people engage with it. Quite a lot don't. But I think, as you've just highlighted there, this is an opportunity for the advisor to start building the relationship, for them to start to get to know you. If I read something that says you live at this address, that means nothing to me. I don't know how you feel about that, but if you said to me, I live at this place, and I'm saying, oh, like, tell me a bit about that, you're like, oh, well, or it's my dream, like, I love it. You can start to get to under the skin of that person, which then means that you're going to be in a better position to understand and help them as part of the service you're providing. With me and my team, like, we kind of talk about the client 360 in 3 levels. It's almost like the first one is the stuff that you would get if they did a digital fact find, right? So you might be in a world where you still did that and said, just give me your hard facts, or connect to open banking and to these other apps, and they're going to pull it all for me. And we can leave that stuff behind and get onto the detail later. But then you've got like the middle piece around, well, what are your goals and aspirations? But that third layer that our advisors, I don't believe, ever get an opportunity to get to, is when you really start to understand, because they've not just said they want to retire at this age. They've told you why and what they're going to do after they retire, which then helps you build a more comprehensive, meaningful plan for that person. And if you can get there, I think that's how you get people engaged in their plan. It becomes their plan that they're keeping alive. And it's almost like, this is what I need to make sure I do to meet that piece. And that advisor is going to help me do that.
That feels like it almost moves towards the financial coaching. I mean, financial planning, financial coaching, it means actually, let's forget about the product behind the scenes. Let's forget about the suitability report and all that kind of probably straightforward stuff, whether you need an ISA or a pension or something, like, fairly easy, isn't it? And is that almost the inflection point of where we'll get to in the next few years, I suppose?
100%. I think that's absolutely it. And then also coming away from that piece where, I'm having a conversation with you because you're ready to take your tax-free cash, and I'm going to help you do that, or I'm going to help you make sure you don't take all of it and you take a little bit of it because you understand. I think a lot of conversations are happening in there, as opposed to seeing a lot of stuff now saying, if you invested this for your kids, it'd be worth this when they're 18. If you invested this into your pension, then it means it's going to be this when you're ready to retire. That's going to make the big difference, not what's the best way to take your tax-free cash of the money that you've already got and don't really have an opportunity to change in terms of what's in that pot. So your destiny is almost defined when you're ready to take the money out. And I think we have an opportunity as part of technology and data and the coaching and kind of, making financial advice, financial health principles more accessible. That's the type of conversations you can start to get into.
I feel like it'd be really interesting to dig into your thoughts on intergenerational financial planning from there. And also, like, it seems that the financial health and just general having a financial plan and the advice gap, and younger people that might just need to put some money into an ISA. So the traditional financial advice model can't make money out of that, but they're probably going to inherit some cash. And that feels like a propositional muddle of stuff that needs to be solved.
It is. I think I'm not really sure where I stand on it. I think basically I've got you have these aspirations where, and the banks were starting to do it a little bit. When you told them that you had a child, when the child got to about 7, they'd be sending you an application for a child card, or, as soon as you had the child, they'd be saying, open the ISA. I think there's a big piece around that in terms of that intergenerational wealth piece, in terms of setting the next generation up for success. I think a lot of it comes with, if we can move to a model where you don't need the amount of money you need to have a conversation with someone, that's when a lot of the hygiene and financial health aspects can almost come to life for everyone, which then means that you're always already thinking about it at the point when you then have your wealth to be able to start to share. I think there is a piece where today process and policy make it difficult to do the simple things for clients, whereby they're like, well, I want to open an ISA. And it's like, that's just not worth my time doing it as an advisor, because there's so many hoops for them to jump through. So I think there is a piece that we can fix there to almost look at the household and how can we support the household with any of their financial planning needs. And I think if you are doing the plan and that is the focus as opposed to the SR, you'll start to get a little bit of you'll get highlights, or you'll start to understand when that type of conversation is going to be valuable to that client. And I think that's the piece that technology allows you to start to show when certain conversations are going to be of value. I think that's the piece that hasn't really been cracked yet with technology, but I think in the next couple of years it will be.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, because there's often this idea that people taking out their first ISA, they should do it online or just robo sorted. And someone investing £1 million wants to sit in front of an advisor, but actually that's completely the wrong dimension. But we're set up, I suppose, as an industry where that's the financial model behind it, so that becomes the propositional model.
Yep.
And we can't cross subsidize, but maybe we can between intergenerational planning.
Yes, and I think that's the piece. At the end of the day, I'm pretty sure. I am opening my kids' ISAs, like the JISA. So actually, before I'm needing to have a conversation with the child, it's actually I'm the client, but I'm opening up for someone else. But I do believe that a lot of the structure and the propositional and service elements of our industry are driven about, well, how much money do you have and how much can I get by selling you this product with the product focus? I think that's going to shift in the next couple of years.
So I see there's loads of smaller firms or newer firms coming to market with like monthly subscription models and innovative pricing. But then 99.9% of the market isn't on that basis. And I can see why. And it feels like a big, almost insurmountable shift to move. I mean, do you think that's where it will go, or is there somewhere in between? Or
the way that I think about it is I would like an advisor to be able to segment their book, to basically say, the business I do today is the business I'll do tomorrow, but I'll be quicker and more efficient with it. And then I've got some capacity to start to fill up the other propositional buckets that I've got. So I can turn on a model that says, I can do all of this for you for this price. I can do this for you for this price in terms of the service that I can provide and the value I can deliver to you at the stage that you're at right now. I believe that technology that's available now will mean that you, at whatever stage you are and whichever segment you're in, can get a valuable service, can understand what your plan is, and can have a strategy to deliver it. It's just the types and complexity of that as you kind of go along that spectrum require more support from the advisor. But today, because of that capacity piece, they stick at that end stage. But I think also the other thing is we don't have enough advisors. So if we don't have enough advisors, the advisor's not going to choose to make no money over some money if they can. So I think there's another piece there in terms of how do we get more advisors into the industry to level things up a little bit.
Some of those changes will be, or could be, potentially not painful for an advisor, but they're not short-term obvious. So almost like you said earlier, if I'm currently doing profitable business and I'm making good money, why would I start doing stuff that's not profitable? But if you look 3 or 5 years ahead, you've got to start doing that, because that's where the industry is going to move. Someone's going to come in and do it, and there's a huge opportunity. So how do you kind of reconcile that more strategic view with the more immediate and the different perspectives that are at play?
Ultimately, we've got a lot of academies now who are bringing around the new type of advisor. And I think those advisors will think very differently about their client bank and their service proposition and how they support clients. We've then got the advisors in the middle who aren't ready to retire, still want to grow, and they'll almost be like, I'm going to have to adopt this new way of working because otherwise, I'm not going to be able to keep up, or I'm not going to be able to service the number of clients that I'd like to. And we'll come back to that group. But then you've got the retiring advisors who are like, I'm on my plan. I've only got to do this for a couple more years. But it's those advisors we need to kind of have an exit for. And I think that's kind of as part of what we have in the network, is to be able to support those advisors to retire. Regulation is going to force advisors to change whether they like it or not, in terms of being able to demonstrate value, in terms of being able to ensure you get consistent client outcomes and to be able to evidence it. I think those advisors who are not wanting to change will very soon be feeling the heat by not wanting to, because if they don't change, they're not going to be able to evidence those things. So not that we need a big stick, but I think that's one of the things in terms of how we position it to advisors, this is coming, but actually you can get great client outcomes, you can get capacity back, and you can focus on your client relationships as opposed to the admin that you've had to in the past.
Yeah, totally. I'm really interested on, so you mentioned academies and bringing new people in. There's almost, and I'm not really close to this, but from the outside, it looks like a chicken and egg kind of situation where we need to modernize the industry and make it look appealing and cool and not as old school and archaic as it might do. But probably the only way we do that is by bringing new people in that are excited about change. What's your kind of thoughts on how we grow the industry and bring the new breed through, I suppose?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like, as we are looking to transform the industry and change the way in which we are perceived by the general public, I think a lot about making it more accessible is making sure that we do have advisors that can speak to everyone, advisors that want to take on a new model, and an advisor that really wants to, be passionate about how they support clients achieve their financial health.
So, I mean, there's so much going on right now, and I feel like personally quite jealous of the role you're in and position you've got. What are you most excited about, I guess, in terms of the industry and what you're doing and what you're up to?
I love solving problems. And I think this is a big, complex problem in terms of how do we deliver really great experiences? How do we not complicate things? How do we challenge how we've kind of, from a risk and control perspective, built processes in the past? And how do we do it differently going forward? So I think I'm really excited about almost the green field, the shackles off, you can ask any question. This is a safe space kind of space that we're in. Because if you don't do that, because of how quickly technology is changing, you're going to almost design something that's out of date by the time you've got it out. And I guess that's the piece on the other side that is the, don't mess this up side of things. But I think, to be able to say, that you were able to create a process that allowed an advisor to 100% focus on a client conversation, or that when a client called an advisor, the advisor knew exactly where they were in their stage. They knew what they could talk to them about just with the system that we'd kind of put in their hands. I think that that's the outcome that's essentially driving kind of all of the research and the thinking and the whiteboard sessions and all the discovery that we're doing at the moment.
It's always not that fun to talk about the risks or the challenges, but what's the biggest thing that you think might be the hurdle to climb over or iceberg to navigate around in achieving that?
I think because there is so much to choose from, fatigue around decision making, and then almost trying to shoehorn too much into the solution, I think will be the downfall of it. I think there's also, we look at how other service industries engage with people and customers. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to over-engage. And we don't want to get people looking at their app and looking at their pension every day, because that's the wrong behaviors. So I think there's a bit of a challenge there in terms of what's the content strategy, what's the contact strategy, and in creating an always-on omni-channel service, that you don't land the wrong side of it in terms of creating the wrong behaviors.
That's super. I mean, great to hear. I remember years ago, people building Alexa skills for their pensions. They could quickly ask while they're frying an egg, what's my pension worth? Or seen metrics come out from firms around how do we get the client in their client portal every day or twice a day, which I know is a great stat for a social media company, but it feels wrong for the financial planning. And
it's interesting you say that. Digital engagement scores are still something that we track and that we are measured upon. But then as soon as you start to get under the skin of it, it's not something we want people interacting with that often. So I think we've got to look at how we start to understand what does a successful relationship look like with a customer through an advisor, and then an advisor to a business. And I think once you start to define that, I think it's going to be easier to build those KPIs.
That was really good. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, actually. Yeah. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
It was great to meet you in person, and great to be here. So thank you for having me.
Cheers.